I'm Chartel Hawkins, member of the NAACP DeKalb branch, and I have invited Amy Ard to speak with us from Motherhood Behind Bars. I was fortunate enough to be able to attend a virtual screening put on by Motherhood Behind Bars and Georgia Public Broadcasting. Is that right? Yep. It's speaking to this very issue of what our incarcerated mothers face here in Georgia specifically. And I invited Amy because just in that screening, I learned so much information that I would have never known, and just became honestly enraged a little about, kind of what they are facing and how this continues to disrupt family systems, specifically in our state. As a trained therapist, I looked at it from a mental health lens and just couldn't believe how many of our families are disrupted by this. So yes, Amy was able to come and speak to us about that very issue. So thank you for being here. We really do appreciate it. And I will let you take over.
Thanks. Well, I will say that 2 kids' violin lessons have just wrapped up in the back, but I cannot promise that you won't hear a lot of noise in the background because 3 kids and my in-laws are here, and I heard my husband walk in, so there are a lot of people in this house right now. I'm squirreled away in the back. I am Amy Ard. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit in Georgia called Motherhood Beyond Bars. And the nonprofit has been working since 2013, although became a nonprofit in 2018, and really was born out of a program at Emory University, the contextual education requirement out of the divinity school, when a student was placed in a prison in Georgia where all pregnant women are held, and realized that they were getting their constitutionally mandated health care but no education support. And she built a prenatal education program specifically for incarcerated women and started delivering that inside the prison. And that was in 2013. And the women that were joined together for that education class called themselves Motherhood Beyond Bars. And everyone says Motherhood Behind Bars, and it's very, very, very common. And I have, instead of changing the name of the organization, just stuck to the name that the women gave it, even though I have to explain it a lot. And I think it's meaningful because most of the women were really focused on the time beyond this current incarceration period, becoming mothers, being in touch with their families, reunifying. And that is like our hopeful horizon that we're really focused on. I do have some slides with some statistics, and some of them are quite recent. So I will share. Oops, it's disabled for me to share.
I wonder if I can do that.
Yeah, Chartel,
I think I can make you a co-host as well. And I think you'd be able to share.
Okay, I am now a co-host. I will share. Let's see, you will see. Let's see what happens when I do this. Okay, I can't see you anymore. Can you all see the big screen with just, or you can see all my notes? Okay. So I am going to go through some statistics, and because I can't see you anymore, just interrupt me if you have a question and a slide, because I'm happy to stop. There are about 3,000 pregnant women admitted to prison each year. We have an epidemic of mass incarceration in the country. One of the interesting statistics about who's being locked up in the United States is that we have had significant declines in the number of incarcerated people in the country, but that hasn't been equal for men and women. And in fact, the number of women behind bars has increased by about 700% over the last 4 decades. So we have locked up more women in the last 40 years than ever before in our history. And those numbers, although they fluctuated a little bit, really haven't made any huge significant decreases. My computer is doing something crazy. These are brand spanking new statistics from the Prison Policy Initiative. If you don't follow them on social media or on their website, I encourage you to do it. These statistics were released this week. And this is not just for women, this is men and women, but you can see this really outlines where people are held in carceral settings. You can see that the vast majority of people, and this is true for women in Georgia, are in state prisons. Local jails hold a whole lot of people. Federal prisons and jails are very, a small piece of that pie. So when we're talking about changes that really affect the lives of incarcerated men and women, we really need to be focusing on the very local levels in our counties and local jails and the state levels. That's where most of the people are. And you can see, although these are for everyone, there are 1.9 million people who are confined nationwide. It makes us it makes us the country in the world that incarcerates more of our population than any other place in the world. And there are, and I'm sure I don't need to explain this to you all, significant disparities in who is behind bars in the United States. So the US share of population, these might be slightly old statistics, 64% white and 12% Black, but Black people are overrepresented in prison. 33% of the prison population is Black, while only 12% of the US share of population is. So when you look at women, if you were to look at a prison yard in Georgia in particular, and especially for a women's prison, it would surprise you, I think, to see a whole lot of white faces. And in fact, the majority of the women that we work with in our program are white. What we have started to notice throughout the years is that the disparities in the lengths of sentences, so you can look at people who committed the same crime, white, Black, and you will notice that the Black woman has a longer sentence than the white woman. I always like to point out the disparity. First of all, that they're a smaller part of the population, so they should be a smaller portion of the prison population, and that is not true for men or women in Georgia specifically. There's a really important difference, I think, when we talk about women in prison versus men in prison. The statistics are very clear that if a woman is arrested who is the mother of a young child, that her children are 5 times more likely to end up in foster care than if the father is arrested. So we know that women enter prison already lacking a social safety net that helps preserve their family. So often when a man is arrested and is a father, there is a network of people around him that step in to take care of the family in his absence. A woman is really lucky if there is one person on the outside that is offering assistance and help and taking the children. And that's one of the reasons why the impacts of maternal incarceration ripple so wide, that this affects children, it affects communities when women are taken out and mothers are taken out of their community. And how many people does this affect? It affects a lot of people. 80% of women in jails are mothers to dependent children. There are 2.9 million women jailed every year. And 10 million children in our country have had a parent behind bars. And you think about the disruptive effect that this has on children, and it's really staggering. There was one researcher once that told me there is one child in every single classroom in the United States, statistically speaking, that has had a parent behind bars. And you think about the number of classrooms that we have here and what that could mean for entire communities. Now we know that it's not spread throughout all communities, that it is actually disproportionately affecting communities of color. The experience of women in prison, and I'm going to stop my screen here because there might be some questions and I can come back to it. The experience of women in Georgia's prisons, I think, is worth pointing out or discussing at some length because it's different in every state. And so to understand what the experience of incarceration and pregnancy is like, you have to be really state specific. Georgia gets a few things right. One of the things that happens in Georgia is when you're sentenced to state prison and you are pregnant, you are moved to a small facility in Atlanta that's called Helms Facility, and it's on Constitution Road, right off of Moreland Avenue. And it's a medical facility. So all of your medical care happens there. It's constitutionally mandated health care. Is it the best obstetrics care in the world? No, it is not. Do we have serious concerns about how women's medical concerns are treated there? Yes, we do. when a woman goes into labor, or more frequently when it is time for her induction date, that's something that we see a lot of. They are taken to Atlanta Medical Center, and that is where all infants are born out of the Georgia prison system. This makes it easy to actually provide services to pregnant women in Georgia prisons if they would let you in. So it's for 2 years. We have not walked back into the prisons. And it makes it surprisingly easy to enroll infants into a support program, which is what we have started doing since 2020. And I'll explain more about that. But having that central location helps. Women are taken to Atlanta Medical Center. They deliver on the regular labor and delivery floor. They, until quite recently, had 2 hours with their babies before they were separated. So the mothers would then be moved to what they call the forensics floor in the basement of the hospital, and the babies are sent to the NICU. And that's because there's no healthy baby nursery at Atlanta Medical Center. We know what happens to healthy babies in a NICU is they don't get a whole lot of attention. They don't get held. That important skin-to-skin contact and human contact is really not happening in that first 24, 48 hours for those infants. Moms are supposed to be able to visit with their children in the NICU, and that's really dependent on staffing. And we know that the Georgia Department of Corrections has a staffing crisis right now. So there's not a lot of availability for them to get correctional officers to bring the moms to the nursery. After 48 hours, if it's a vaginal birth and everything is medically okay for the mother to be released, she puts back the prison clothes that she had when she came in labor. She doesn't get any extra pads, underwear, nothing. She is put on a prison transport vehicle and taken to Lee Arrendale State Prison, which is the largest women's prison in the state. And she is supposed to be admitted directly to the clinic from there to continue her recovery. Now, sometimes the clinic is full, and we know that they've been putting women in isolation, or we call that solitary confinement, for medical observation. So knowing that you have a woman who's just been separated from her newborn and putting them in solitary confinement is absolutely a human rights abuse. We did pass a law in 2019 that's supposed to prohibit that practice from happening, but we know that it is still happening when the clinic is full. When this meeting started, you saw me on the phone with 2 of our clients who are in the clinic right now who gave birth this week. And so one of them was able to call in and report on what was happening. And it's not fantastic. The question.
Amy, I'm sorry. Can I ask a question? Because I will forget
Please.
if I don't ask. So when they call in and let you know what's happening, what's the step after that? Are you all like calling legislators or keeping track? Is that kind of how some of the data is collected?
It depends on what we're hearing and what rises to the level of an actionable or grievable offense. We have a very close relationship with the Southern Center for Human Rights. And so when we start to hear about things that need immediate action or we think are grievable or actually rise to the level of something that could end up in a lawsuit one day, we have a very open and kind of standing meetings with them when we talk about the treatment specifically of postpartum women in the prison system. The reason I'm getting a phone, it's very rare for me to get phone calls from Lee Arrendale. We have one client that I've known for 4 years now, and I am on her approved phone list. I'm not on the approved phone list for most of our clients. So most of the time we're depending on email communication back and forth, which can lag quite a bit for people who have come in from the hospital. So the fact that I'm on this woman's call list allowed her roommate to call me, her roommate at the clinic to call me because she just had a C-section and is not doing very well. So her roommate was able to use her calling number to call me and just give me the update. That was the first time I'd been able to get contact with her since the baby was born on Saturday. So we usually are having, or most of our contact is over email with our moms. A lot of questions about what happens to the infants and once the babies are born. So we know that being born to a woman in prison is a really bad way to start. We know that kids there's adverse childhood experiences, so ACEs that children can accumulate over their early years, and these are indicative of problems later and throughout their life. One of those ACEs is having a parent or a close family member who's incarcerated. So every one of these children is born with at least one ACE against them from the minute they take their first breath, and most of them over the course of their lives will have more. We know that kids born to people in prison are more likely to have a mental health diagnosis, more likely to have trouble learning at school, and disturbingly are 3 times more likely to end up in prison because that's where they were born. And we are trying very hard to figure out what interventions we can provide to families, caregivers, and infants to help reverse some of those trends. And in 2020, well, I'll go back to share my screen. Prior to 2020, all of our programs happened inside prisons. So we walked into Helms, we did childbirth education classes, we did postpartum support groups, prenatal yoga, baby showers. We were working on public policy and advocacy and family reunification planning. And we were really working to center the identity of motherhood for the women that we worked with. Women in prison are called a lot of things, most likely inmate, felon, a number, sometimes their last name. But what they're not called very often is mothers. And so we wanted to remind them that there was someone on the outside of those prison walls that was counting on them to come back out again and be connected, to be a mother. And so all of our programs really focused on that and preparing them for that journey ahead. These are pictures from our baby showers. We were able to provide women with gift bags that had soaps, shampoos. These are things that women are not issued in prison. They often have to pay for them themselves. So these personal care items are things of great value and a real comfort to women, especially this was the baby shower in the prison. We would play games and have healthy food. Fresh fruits and vegetables were always such a huge treat in our baby showers because they are so rarely given them. For pregnant women on the weekends, they don't get a hot meal. So they're offered cheese toast and an apple. And so any kind of nutritious food that we could bring in, that we would bring a lot of fat foods. So a lot of like full fat yogurts and nuts, and then a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables. We also, during the early period, worked actively to end the practice of shackling in Georgia. So Georgia was, until 2019, one of 20-something states that allowed pregnant women to be shackled even during childbirth. And in 2019, the governor signed a bill that outlawed shackling in Georgia's prisons and jails for second and third trimester during labor and then 6 weeks postpartum. We have discovered that passing a law and having a law actually upheld are 2 very different things. So we know that women are being shackled in the postpartum period, especially. We have not heard stories of people being shackled to a bed while they deliver their baby. That is just, the very low bar that we've jumped over. But it also included things like not holding women in solitary, not doing coffin squat searches, and no vaginal exams by anyone but a medical provider. And we know that the coffin squat searches are happening quite regularly for pregnant and for postpartum women. This is Lee Arundel State Prison. This is where our postpartum groups were held. And this is one of our postpartum groups. Everyone that has a face that you can see said it was okay to use their face, and anyone else is either still in prison or didn't give us permission. One of the things that we started hearing from women who were in prison about how hard it was to stay in touch with their family members when they gave birth was the cost of communication. So every time someone sends an email into or out of prison, it costs 35 cents. That is $70 cents of a round trip email. When you think about the number of emails that you write to people every day, I would encourage you to put a dollar amount on that. And these are families who do not have 70 cents an email to spend. They are really budgeting every single dollar that they have on rent and food and basic necessities. So when it comes to, and 70 cents is the cheap form of communication, so phone calls or more. When it comes to having mothers stay connected to their families inside, the cost is really prohibitive for a lot of them. We started to hear when we were in prison stories of women calling to their caregivers, and I'd like to, going back to what happens to the infants, all mothers have the opportunity to identify someone that will come to the hospital and pick up their baby. So they write a name and a phone number down on a piece of paper, and that is who the hospital calls when the mom, 48 hours after birth, she goes back to prison. When she is back, they pick up the phone and call that number on the piece of paper. And usually it is a family member, sometimes it is a friend, sometimes it is someone that the mom has not known for very long. But they are all really desperate to keep the child out of the foster care system because they know that once the child is there, the chances of reunifying with their child get much more complicated. So they will really choose someone, even if they don't think that that's the best possible person in the world to come pick up their baby, they will choose someone to come pick the baby up rather than go into foster care. And then what we started to hear from women in our postpartum group was that they would call home, they would want to check on the baby, they would hear the baby scream, they would, the caregiver would be ruffled, the relationship between the mom and the caregiver started to fray. And a lot of this had to do with the cost of staying in touch. And then we started to hear about diapers and diaper rash. And the mom started to say, every time I call, they say the baby's screaming with diaper rash. And we started to realize that the caregivers actually didn't have enough money for diapers. And so the fact that the babies were screaming was not, the babies weren't screaming for no reason, and the diaper rash was there. And these were families that were so strapped, and the impacts of taking on this baby really created a real hardship for the caregiver families. Our goal has always been the healthy and happy and long-term reunification of moms with their children. We want to make sure that this generation is the last generation that spends time behind prison walls. And so we have built programs that since 2020, when we could no longer go into the prisons, we've built programs that really focus on the entire family. And I'm going to again stop sharing my screen so I can talk a little bit more about that and answer any questions up to this point about the experience of pregnancy and incarceration. All right.
Yeah, I did have a question.
Please.
But you answered part of it. I was going to ask about the expenses and was anybody getting financial assistance? Because the whole idea, if you go in foster care, you're getting that
right
care or whatever, right? You at least getting some kind of sustainability,
like the stipend.
Right, the stipend.
Yeah. So they don't get that to the family member or nothing for the.
No. Mm-mm.
Wow.
They are eligible for, the baby comes from the hospital covered by Medicaid, and then they are eligible for WIC, for women, infant, and children, for formula. And then it would be income dependent for food stamps. When we started the caregiver support program, we realized that they didn't know any of this, and no one was telling them that. So for many of them, they went to pick up the baby unless they had young children or they were already enrolled in some of the social service programs. They had no idea that they were eligible, so that they were, spending money out of pocket for formula. We are now able to, we're a gateway community partner, so we're able to enroll families in, to apply at least for the families on their behalf online, which speeds up the process. I don't know if you have ever tried to fill out an application for WIC or food stamps on a phone, but I will tell you, you will throw it into the river before you will finish that application.
But in person is just as bad. So
in person, it's just, and it can't be in person anymore. They've closed down the offices for the past 2 years. So they're requiring people to do it online, and most people do not have a nice laptop that they can, fire up and do the application. I've tried to do one on a phone with someone before, and it's impossible.
worst.
It's impossible.
Like almost everything. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my question, and you talked about the communication piece as well. So, okay.
In 2020, so at the end of 2019, we started to ask women. Oh, Denise has a question.
Yes. How could you be a foster parent to one of the babies of the parents that are in prison?
Well,
Or is that possible?
well, it's not technically. Most women in prison are to be an approved foster, you have to go through DFACS, generally speaking, to get the supports that the state offers foster families. That is something that most of the women in prison are very anxious to not have their kids enter that system. There's federal legislation that passed during the Clinton administration that if a kid is in foster care for 15 out of 24 months, the parental rights can be automatically revoked, severed. And women are pretty good. These women are pretty good at the math, and they look at how long their sentence is, and often it's 2 years. So if their kid goes into foster care from birth, that 15 months gets used up pretty fast. And they know that when that 15 months is up, the state could step in and say, you're out of luck, like your kids are not your kids anymore. So, and they also know that just the absolute hoops that you would have to jump through to get your kids back if they enter the system are something that they're just not interested in. So it's really rare for a mom not to find a family member or a friend who agrees to come pick up the baby at the hospital and serve as the foster parent, the temporary caregiver, until the mom is released. Most of them are able to do that.
Okay, what if they can't find anyone? Then what happens to the child?
If they can't find anyone, every once in a while, it's in the past year, I mean, this is like a cautionary tale. In last October, a woman came into the prison system very, very pregnant. And before we could get in touch with her, she delivered her baby. We had sent in emails, but she was in quarantine. So she delivered her baby. She was so disconnected from family support or friend support that she did not have anyone whose name to write down on that piece of paper. So we didn't find out about her until after she had delivered. She got all of our emails in November. And she said, I didn't have anyone's name to pick up my baby, so I know that my baby went to foster care, but no one has reached out to me to tell me where my baby is. I am here to tell you that it was the beginning of March before, and many, many, many phone calls from us to DFACS before someone reached out to her to tell her that her baby was okay, alive, in a safe home, whatever. And that's what they know can happen, that if you can't find someone. So when I tell you, we have a woman that is delivering tomorrow. Her baby will go home with someone she met in county jail and was in county jail with for 4 months. That is her chosen caregiver. And they don't know each other that well, but well enough to know that is what she would prefer. That's who she would prefer than foster care. Now, we will be there to support her chosen caregiver. Do we feel like it's an ideal situation? Probably not, but we've made 2 home visits. We're really building a relationship with the caregiver to try to alleviate any of the worst case scenarios, making sure that they have what they need to safely take care of the baby. And so, yeah, when I ideally, you've got a beautiful, loving grandmother that comes to pick up the baby and is committed to taking care of this child and reunifying them with mom. But sometimes it's crazy stories like that one. And we realized, because we were the only organization that was working with postpartum and pregnant women in the prison, it was in 2019 when we realized that at one point I was sitting in the postpartum group and thought, I think I'm the only person in the state that knows where these women's children live or who they're with. Because every week I would ask and I would hear sometimes like concerning stories that they were being passed around a good bit. So they would be with one caregiver and they would be with another caregiver. And so in 2019, when we asked women in prison, what do you need from Motherhood Beyond Bars? They were really clear. They wanted two things. They wanted someone to help take care of their infants, you know, with the caregiver, and they wanted help reunifying with their children when they came home. And those were two programs that we couldn't do as long as we were in-person volunteers in the prison, because the prison won't let you have contact with family members on the outside, and they won't let you work with women inside the prison once they come out. They don't want, they're afraid of personal dealings and bringing in contraband for family members. These are the things that they're concerned about. And at the beginning of 2020, when the prisons were shut down to all in-person volunteers, we realized that we had an opportunity to build the programs they had told us they wanted. And so we started talking to the hospital where all the babies were born. We started talking to DFACS about the kinds of programs that were available for these caregivers and infants. And time again, we heard that we don't do that. That's not us. We don't have any contact with them. And so we built the program and enrolled every single infant that was born out of the Georgia prison system into our infant and caregiver program. So we anticipate about 50 babies a year born out of the Georgia prison system. So this is not jails, this isn't federal prisons, just the Georgia prison system. And we now have a really good pathway to communicating with pregnant women while they're still incarcerated. They tell us who their caregiver is going to be. We reach out to the caregiver. And, you know, in stories like I was telling you about the woman that's known the caregiver for 4 months, we're able to do like a little bit of a needs assessment and make sure that it's a safe place for the baby and they have what they need. And then we talk to both the mom and the caregiver throughout the entire process to build the relationship between mom and caregiver, make sure it's strong, pay for the communication, we pay for all the J-pays, we pay for all of the telephones. We make sure that moms have pictures of their babies from the minute they get back from the hospital, and we send updates. We are developing an app for caregivers that's a baby book. So all they have to do is take pictures of the baby, and then we can send that to moms and have a printed version of it when they get out. And importantly, we send every single caregiver in our program diapers every single month. So that is one expense that our caregivers are not going to have to cover. And that has proven to be really an important element of our program, especially this past year as the cost of diapers has just skyrocketed. We spend about $80 per caregiver on diapers every month. So that'll be about $40,000 this year that we'll spend on diapers alone. And when you think about the impacts of, you know, diaper poverty in the US, like 1 in 3 families has a hard time paying for diapers for their kids. This part of a program we feel is pretty essential and helps us build really trusting, strong relationships with the caregivers. We are also doing research with Harvard School of Public Health, and we are following every infant born in the prison system, and we are looking at the impacts of incarceration on infants, which is something no one has ever done before because no one's ever collected all of the infants born out of a state system before. The caregivers and then the moms, when they return home, do an interview with us every 3 months, and we're looking at infant milestones and development. We're looking at caregiver health and mental health, and we're looking at communication patterns between caregivers and moms to help figure out what we need to do to support that healthy relationship. Because we've also found that almost always the moms are coming back to the caregiver and the infant when they're released from prison. So they're planning on living together for a short period of time, at least, for the mom to get her feet back on the ground. And the work ahead of our organization is really to build a comprehensive reentry program for moms that focuses on family reunification for the long term. So I have gone back and forth between I'm leaving the slides. Now it's just, we'll just communicate, ask questions. I know I've bounced around a little bit more than I usually do, but Denise has another question.
Yes, have you ever dealt with a inmate who turned her child over to a caregiver and that caregiver passed away while taking care of that child? What happens to the child? And does the mother inmate, is she notified of the caregiver that was taking care of her child and what happened to her child?
Uh-huh. Um, Sadly, yes, we have had that situation this past summer. It was the mother in prison. It was, she called her, you know, she was fictive kin. So the caregiver was someone that she had known for most of her life, but wasn't actually a blood relative. And the woman was beautiful, wonderful, and had a brain aneurysm and died very suddenly. And the impacts on her family were tremendous. That child was then placed in the care of the incarcerated woman's mother. And that is where that child is now, although the child seems to spend most of his time at the neighbor's house next door. We're tracking this one pretty carefully and trying to offer some alternatives and help. But that was a case where the death of the original caregiver was really like an atomic bomb going off in a family. Yes, the mother was aware the whole time about what was happening and was able to make the decision about where the child would go next. Yeah, that was a pretty tragic situation.
I really loved hearing all the positives about your program because it sounds so, because I can see the need from, you know, the statistics and everything you were giving. It's just, I'm very grateful. I have had experience teaching at Lee Arundel through the Candler School of Theology, and we did not meet any women who were incarcerated. We did meet a number of mothers who would talk about their children sometimes in our classes, and the difficulties, seeing them, you know, sometimes on weekends at you know, in the prison setting, or not seeing them, expecting to, and not something comes up. It's a big, I could tell from their responses how devastating it was when families couldn't be together. You know, if things were planned for visitation and they couldn't be together, or they were together, but then, you know, they had to say goodbye to the child at the end of the visit. And it brought up so many feelings for them. I also really appreciate that you're well, it was when you were talking at the beginning about how you pay attention to the names of the women. That's something we did in our program too, because we were trying to be affirming. So having a positive adjective even before their first name, so that they would, you know, just one way of affirming who they are, because so much of their humanity is stripped away. I don't have any particular questions, but I do hope that there are ways that you can tell us that we can be helpful, and get our communities to be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, the theology program with Liz Bounds is just a real bright light in at Lee Arundel State Prison. I'm really grateful for you and for all the people that were a part of that. Working inside the prisons is a very difficult place to be, especially when you're dealing with healthcare. It is pretty clear to me that I won't be going back into the prisons. That's not my choice. At some point, my involvement with pointing out human rights abuses put me on the wrong side of the Georgia Department of Corrections. And so there's been a real whisper campaign. They've never sent me a email or a letter saying that I can't go in, but they have made contact with colleagues and told them to cease having contact with me, just very,
Oh
very
my goodness.
professional level stuff. Um, and 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 I have come to the conclusion that I have actually far more contact with women now than I did when I walked in and did a group setting. So I'm able to really one-on-one, through email and sometimes through phone and through family members, get a clearer sense of, what she needs when she comes home and what she needs at the moment. So we have been able to connect women in our program with pen pals over JPay. So that's one way that folks can get involved. We are in the process of building out a reentry program. We've come to the conclusion of, for any like nonprofit that's past the founding stage but getting into like the longer term, we have completed a 3 to 5 year strategic plan. So I feel like we're like fully legit now. We've got a strategic plan. Part of that is really the building out of the reentry program, and that will require actually a good bit of community help and support in really connecting women to community supports where they live. This is one of the tricky things. Before we started this program, we didn't know where these women who had given birth while they were in prison were going after they left. And now we have a pretty good sense that they are going back to the caregiver, and those caregivers very rarely live in Atlanta. So we have them on a map, and we know that many of them are going to Central and South Georgia. So and this is why I think organizations like NAACP, church organizations, folks that have communities spread out will be really important for us as we try to connect these women to local resources. And to say that like we're ready for those connections to start happening is probably a little premature. We have a little bit more planning, and I'm guessing a few road trips in us before we're ready to really build out that program. But that's a kind of a stay tuned thing. If you are, we have a website, we have a lot of social media. We often put calls to action on there, or specific donation needs that we have. Every single child that leaves the hospital leaves with a large box of supplies. It's called our Begin box. And yesterday, if you go to our social media on Facebook or Instagram, you'll see I did a video yesterday. We sent our last 4 boxes to the hospital of this one design. It was based on the Finnish baby box program, and it's a cardboard box with a mattress, and we put about $300 worth of baby stuff inside it. And the people that made that box told us last summer that they were going to discontinue it, and we have not been able to find another box, which is terrible. But we will be sending all the caregivers home with all of the same supplies and a safe place for the baby to sleep. And when we need it, when we do a donation drive to fill up those, it's things like diaper cream and baby lotion and baby soaps and cute little outfits and bottles and diapers. So those kinds of supplies are always things that we need to put in those boxes. And it's always great when we can get them donated and not have to buy them out of our budget. So when we've had really great response from the community when we've said, all right, we need another box drive, let's fill up these boxes. That is always something that those baby items are something we can use. I'm seeing the question about gathering the feminine products. Right now, we can't get those in to prison, but there are organizations like Liz Bounds and working through the chaplaincy at Lee Arendale. They can sometimes get those in. We've had those in the past. We'll see, like when things start opening up again, what we're able to do. I just wrote Chaplain Bishop who's the chaplain at Lee Arendale State Prison, about these sorts of things, and she kind of declined the offer in the last few weeks. So those are trickier to get in. Yeah. Which is frustrating, as you can.
Yeah, the chaplains wield a lot of power in the prison system. So it's good to get on their good side, but that doesn't mean that they can always accommodate you.
Right. Yeah. They're walking a fine line almost all the time too. Yeah. There is one legislative thing that I will mention, something to watch, and that is House Bill 1092, which is called the Women's Care Act. It passed unanimously through the House several weeks ago, so it made it through crossover days today, or still is, I guess. And it's on its way to the Senate. And this is a bill that would, if a woman is arrested and held in county jail, she must be offered a pregnancy test. And if she takes it and it's positive, she is supposed to appear before a judge within 72 hours. And the judge has judicial discretion to release her on an OR bond, which is a no money bond, until 6 weeks postpartum. So effectively, what this would do if judges took the bait would be to release women from the carceral system and give them a 6-week delay in sentencing postpartum. So it would effectively mean not very many women would give birth while they were incarcerated. They would get to stay home, and they would get 6 weeks together with their infants. I could choose to be very hopeful about this, but I haven't gotten there quite yet. So I'm worried about two things. I'm worried that judges are not going to release women. So it's judicial discretion. They can take a look at the woman and say, nope, you are clearly an opioid user, and therefore you are a threat to yourself and your unborn child, and the best place for you is in prison to dry up. That's what I think the most likely thing to happen is if this bill passes, judges just won't do it. And the second thing that I'm concerned about is that if judges do offer women that opportunity, they are returning back to communities that were incredibly low resource communities to begin with. 50% of our counties in Georgia don't have an obstetrician. Where are they supposed to get the prenatal care? Many of them have an opioid use disorder, and we are not offering them any treatment with this program. We're just releasing them back to the community. So 72 hours ago, they may have been an active opioid user. Now go back home, stop doing that business, and then have your baby. And then what I'm afraid might happen is that the women don't get treatment. They give birth to a child who screens positive for meth, and then we have family separation at the moment of birth instead of offering the woman resources and help. So that is a bill that directly affects the people that we work with. And it did pass unanimously through the House. It does save the state a lot of money. That's one thing it does. So if they don't have to pay for obstetric care for women in prisons, that sounds good to a lot of our state lawmakers.
Yeah, I need to add, I've been in touch with somebody who was in prison for 30 years and has been released once it became clear that he was sick enough where, the prison would have to pay for a lot of health care. So that's, just the other end of life. It's, they punish and punish. They punish the family. It's a very mean. I think, I saw Stacey Abrams or we're not going to talk politics here, but anyway, a public figure was talking about how mean we are as a state. Anyway, that's my comment for now.
Yeah.
There's so many things involved. As you were speaking, Amy, that's what I was thinking about, just the treatment in jails and prisons in general. And then, the added layer of being a woman, and then the added layer of being a pregnant woman, and then, the cost of connection in prisons. And I just kept thinking like, oh my gosh, how do we where do we go first? The thing that I think that really bothers me is how much it costs to connect with people. My biggest issue with our prison system, our incarceration system is it's meant to cut you off from people. And then when you're released, you go back to what you were doing in the first place. It's not rehabilitative. So yeah, if you're charging 35 cents to connect with someone or $1.50 to connect with someone, and then good luck after 15 years, making different choices, and then the rates of recidivism and all of those things, come into play. So yeah, as you were speaking, I just thought about so many things that affect you know, how people are
Right.
cut off. So yeah, I'm happy that you all are working really hard and diligently to keep those connections. Yeah.
I think it makes a difference. And I
Oh,
also,
it does.
we, you know, we talk a lot about big problems that are intergenerational. I often like wish I had a time machine and I could turn it back like 3 generations, maybe 4, when I hear women's stories in prison and realize that they were a child that was left when their own mom or dad went to prison, and how many generations back we have to go before, you know, that cycle doesn't repeat. And so the problem seems really big and it seems overwhelming, and it seems like, you know, we could throw a lot at it, but the problem is so deep that it doesn't, you know, what's our hope of success? But then women tell me that one time 2 years ago, someone gave them a roll of really soft toilet paper, and it reminded them that someone cared about them. And they hold that one roll of
Wow.
toilet paper as the most gracious, like the act of grace that reminded them that they mattered.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, so we send diapers. And so we give toilet paper when we
Yeah.
can, and we write letters, and we remind them that they are cared about and that someone on the outside is waiting for them. And I don't think, you know, like those little acts of kindness, which one of those is going to be transformational. And so you just do a lot of them and hope
Good.
that like the little things add up over time. And so those little acts of kindness matter. We won't save people all the time, you know, that's like, I'm not naive, and I'm not that naive, but I think that reminding people that they are beloved members of a community over time matters. So
For sure. Thank you, Amy. This was awesome. I love the piece about how we can be impactful community wise, and the location. I wish we had all night to talk. But thinking about the screening, I guess I just want to mention is that, like you were saying, a lot of the women aren't going back to Metro Atlanta. Most of them, I feel like, if I remember, are housed very far away from their families in the first place. So thinking about visits and things like that. So I think it's important to point out the location piece. And yeah, thinking about, I did part of my education at Valdosta State. So thinking Lowndes County and, you know, even really North Georgia, where, yeah, they don't have as many resources because people think Georgia, Atlanta, and not Georgia,
Right.
all of the other hundreds of counties we have that, yes, might not have an obstetrician for 50 plus miles or
Right.
a community health center. So yeah, so I guess I'm thinking about them, yeah, partnering with some other organizations, yeah, that are in more rural parts of Georgia, so that there's some base for resources and connection.
yeah, yeah. Well, I have really appreciated spending time with you. I have an
Thank you
8
so
o'clock
much.
meeting, believe it or not, that I'm
Yeah.
late for.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And we will follow you on social media. Keep an eye out for those calls to
Yeah.
actions and donation drives. I think, yes, at the very least, we can spread the word for that and have, you know, people be able to donate to this amazing nonprofit organization.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah.
yes, thank you so much. We appreciate it, Amy.
I
Thank you
appreciate
so
your
much,
time.
and all
Thank
the
you so
volunteers.
much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Take care, y'all.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Have a good night. Bye.